Hi, I'm Benny
My name
Morris.
is Yossi Klein. Hello.
I'm Lahav Harkov.
I'm David Stav.
My name is Einat Wilf.
And this is 18 questions.
18 questions
for 40 Israeli
for 40
thinkers.
Israeli thinkers.
From 1840.
From 1840.
From 1840.
Hi, my name is Sruli Fruchter, and I am the interviewer from 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers, and this is 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers from 1840. What do you think is the most legitimate criticism leveled against Israel today? I asked that question to 40 Israeli thinkers over the course of a year. Right-wing Israelis, left-wing Israelis, centrist Israelis, and even non-Jewish Israelis. And all of the answers varied. There is so much criticism that's lobbed against Israel, and it can often get lost in either dismissing all of it or accepting all of it. We wanted to isolate for our guests to answer what is one criticism that you view as the most legitimate. Even if not entirely legitimate, what do you say is the most legitimate? And all of the answers were very intriguing. This is a fun throwback to the very first interview that I did for the podcast, which was with the acclaimed historian Benny Morris. I was so terrified for that interview, and that is definitely a story for another time. But Benny Morris's answer is one that I think actually resonates in different periods throughout this war. He said that the greatest criticism against Israel was its failure to align itself with the United States, which at that time, when he was speaking, was under the Biden administration. The question of Israeli and U.S. alignment on the war in Gaza, on the war against Hamas, on the future for Gaza, is a question that has come up time and time again.
I think the major criticism should be that Israel has not lined up with America in Israel under the incompetent Netanyahu, has not lined up with America in trying to find a political settlement which would get us out of this rut in which we're stuck at the moment. A political settlement means some form of Arab or Palestinian rule over the Gaza Strip, which would shunt aside the Hamas, so long as there is no alternative for the Arabs in the Gaza Strip or the Arabs around us or the international community, no alternative to the Hamas ruling the place or the IDF ruling the Gaza Strip, this war will continue in one form or another. Only in the Gaza Strip, perhaps in the north with Hezbollah, who knows. I think that's a major mistake. I don't know how exactly one would empower the Palestinian Authority, which sort of controls parts of the West Bank, to take over the Gaza Strip, or a coalition of Arab states and the Palestinian Authority. I don't know how you would empower them there, how you would get them to suppress the Hamas without use of the IDF, but that's the should be the goal, and this hasn't been the goal of the Israeli government under Netanyahu until now. It seems to think that Israel, the IDF, can just stay there and keep fighting the Hamas, and unable to destroy the Hamas properly, will have daily shootouts with the Hamas in the Gaza City or around Rafah or Khan Yunis, and this can go on for years, a war of attrition between a big conquering, occupying army and a guerrilla movement or terrorist movement working out of tunnels. And I don't think the Israeli public will actually stand for this for very long, especially as some of the public doesn't even serve in the army and doesn't seem to care at all about Israeli casualties or anything else except their own needs.
Uri Zaki, a left-wing political thinker and activist who was formerly a member of Knesset, had a much harsher criticism. He said that the criticism that he thought was most legitimate against Israel was its actions and conduct in the West Bank, Yehuda v'Shomron, and in Gaza. Particularly, he took issue with Israel's inability, as he saw it, and unwillingness to change the situation for the Palestinians and to give them a better future.
I think our ongoing occupation of the West Bank and also the Gaza, not occupying it, but what we did there was also mistaken. But our
What we did there and what?
There was the siege on Gaza.
Oh, you're saying pre-October 7th.
Pre-October 7th, yeah. It was a siege only on the population, not on Hamas. They got everything they wanted in suitcases full of millions of dollars. But yeah, I think the criticism against Israel, and especially with this prime minister, especially with this government, not wanting to change the situation vis-a-vis the Palestinians is legitimate. I don't see our leadership, and I think that's anti-patriotic. I think it puts Israel in a not because of security. We know how to defend ourselves, as you see, but in our moral core, our mere, as I said, the formula works on those two pillars. That's the structure of Zionism: the Jewish self-determination and democracy. And at one point, democracy is eroding. Not both. By the way, it's not surprising. Yishai Leibovich, the great thinker here in Israel, said that once you occupy people, it would end up eroding your own democracy, and we see that happening too. So that's a legitimate criticism. But when it goes to one thing is to criticize the occupation, to chant from the river to the sea, and saying Israel itself is the problem. That's anti-Semitism, hatred, and should be condemned in all means possible.
Another highlight comes from another former member of Knesset who now is not so easily boxed into right or left categories. This is Einat Wilf, an author, a writer, and, as I said before, a former member of Knesset. She didn't really have any way to think of what she thought was legitimate criticism that's leveled against Israel from the general public. She took issue, particularly, with the ways in which people often opted for slogans that, as she said, were rooted in classic anti-Semitic notions about erasing the Jewish state and throwing it in the trash. But the criticism that she had is not one she said that others really offered, but that she felt really was the only legitimate one, was that Israel was not taking Hamas seriously enough, not acting harshly enough, and not targeting the ideological framework that allows Hamas to exist and thrive in the Gaza Strip. She said that a lot of the issues people had and leveled against Israel and the Jewish state were really after just trying to watch the Jew flounder to try and defend himself.
That it is too, but I don't think it's a criticism that people level. It's my criticism. That it's too busy trying to surrender to made-up rules rather than pursuing what's really important for our country.
So of what people generally do criticize Israel with, of all those things, which do you think is the most legitimate?
None.
Even if not totally legitimate, but has some merit to it.
Give me an example, because most of what I hear is has no basis, but give me an example of what you think.
Well, no, I think there's so much out there that it's hard for it to select.
I haven't yet heard anything that is, I mean, from the criticisms that are essentially variations on the placard strategy, they're variations on the placard strategy.
You don't hear more moderate types of criticisms that you feel are more balanced?
Like what?
More moderate criticisms either about conduct of the war or about
like
Jewish
what?
and democracy. Meaning, I don't want to personally list anything because I'm curious from, I guess, your experience if there's something there.
I don't hear anything that stands up to any scrutiny. Like when people say the conduct of the war, okay. As I said, there's no military expert. So if you're not a military expert, I have no interest in your criticism of the conduct of the war. Can you tell me how the war could have been conducted differently? I have criticism, but as I said, it's not the criticism as people say, that we defined the enemy too narrowly, that we are resupplying the enemy. That's not your typical criticisms of how the war is conducted. If people really understand what Hamas have built there, military experts have to go to like some island in Japan and some fortresses from 2,000 years ago to compare to what Gaza has built. I mean, I think it's important to devote a minute to that. What the Palestinians have built for several years now, more than a decade, with billions from the outside world, it's not urban warfare. Urban warfare is a bunch of guys hiding in buildings. This is an integrated, weaponized urban landscape. It's taking the entire Gaza Strip and making it into a single weapon of war by connecting hundreds of weapon stashes. And all the stashes were prepared ahead of time in mosques, schools, kindergartens, homes. You can do that only among a supportive population. All those stashes, which were prepared ahead of time, were connected with hundreds of piers through hundreds of kilometers of tunnels. The butchers, except on October 7th, when they wore some uniform, go around in civilian clothing among a supportive population, above ground in civilian clothing or under the tunnels. They go up, the weapons wait for them. When you begin to understand what has been built in Gaza, the conduct of Israel, and as I said, when people will begin to appreciate decades from now the evil that was unleashed on October 7th, they will not understand how Israel was so restrained.
Does it concern you at all that there's such a gap between the criticism that your perspective on Israel and the war versus the world more generally?
Of course, but that's how it works. I wrote a piece which quoted Achad Ha'am. He wrote a piece 140 years ago called Chatzi Nechama, half solace. And where did he find half solace? He was concerned that the Jews, as a result of emancipation, the walls were coming down, the Jews were leaving the ghettos, and they were now surrounded by Christian or Christian secular society that basically told them how evil they were. And he was concerned that they will internalize that notion of what it means to be Jewish. He called it the mechanism of general agreement. Because you're surrounded by it, then doubt begins to creep in. And where did he find half solace? In the blood libel, the original one. Because he said Jews knew that the blood libel, where Jews drink the blood of non-Jewish children for their rituals, is wrong. He says this is one knowledge that Jews could be certain of. And he hoped that that would help steel the Jews for the possibility that, yes, the whole world can be wrong and the Jews be right. So I find half solace in Achad Ha'am's speech. I find half solace in the fact that there is a historical continuum. So that when people tell me right now, no, this time it's different. This time we're only annoyed with the conduct of the war. I have enough of a history to know that the burden of proof for making that claim is entirely on those making that claim. And yes, it pains me to see Israelis and Jews work so hard at trying to disprove that. Sartre said that it's not that the anti-Semite doesn't know what he's doing when he lobs all these claims at the Jew. He wants to see the Jew sit and explain and like expose their empty pockets and say that, they're not all those evil things that they say about them. So rather than, and we've spent so much time trying to respond to every accusation. No, it's not apartheid. No, it's not this. No, rather than exposing the mechanism that makes all these accusations of evil in order to reach the logical conclusion of keep the world clean, which has only ever been the ideology that preceded some of the most horrific acts.
Yishai Fleisher, a rabbi, activist, and spokesperson in Hebron, said that what he thought was the greatest criticism against Israel was actually a very interesting one that sometimes comes from the left and sharp critics of Bibi, but doesn't often come from the right and people like Yishai, who identify with the more right-wing side of political ideology in Israel. Emboldening the Palestinian Authority, emboldening Hamas, were some of the things that he said led to a weak-branded Judaism. And the world, he said, hates Israel and the Jewish state and the Jewish people because, as he describes it, they are weak. Weakness, he says, is the greatest failure and greatest critique he has against the Jewish state.
The biggest criticism should be that we've done a great disservice to the Arabs and to the Jews by creating the Palestinian Authority and paying these terrorists money. And these men, these people, they are these bullies, these thugs. They do the most harm and evil to Arabs. So by creating the Palestinian Authority, we gave away our land. We empowered jihadists. We empowered people who subjugate their own people. We've done a great evil. That is an evil, and that should be rectified. And that evil is against. That evil has taught the world jihadism and terrorism, and has, when we allow them to build up those terror tunnels, and I barely hear that. I barely hear a critique being like, "What the hell happened? How did you allow your enemies to, under your nose, build up a military infrastructure to attack you?" Like, October the 7th is just a manifestation of that awful failure. And it could happen in Judea and Samaria as well. It could happen in the north as well. It could happen in the south as well. So we've allowed our enemies and people, detractors of our country, to really have built up a serious infrastructure and then a global consciousness. Israel's weak hasbara, weak brand, weak branding has allowed an alternative narrative to seep into the minds of millions, including the TikTok generation. So there's a lot of critique that can be leveled against the state of Israel. I mean, really, the world hates us, and that is in my mind, that is 100% the fault of weak policy.
Last, we find ourselves with Michael Oren, the 40th Israeli thinker who was the former Israeli ambassador to the United States and has been a writer, author, and speaker and thinker in so many different capacities. The greatest issue and greatest critique against the state of Israel that he says is the failure to make its case to the state of Israel. Failure to explain itself, failure to explain its rationale, failure to explain its strategy, to clue society in to what the plan was and where everything is going. That failure and that lack of transparency is what Michael Oren says was a great miss on the part of the government.
The most legitimate criticism is that the government doesn't make its case, neither to the world nor to the people of Israel. So I began this talk by expressing my opinion about the way the prime minister may see the situation, in ways that other people may not see the situation, because he has that 360-degree view. But when was the last time you heard the prime minister actually come out and make that case?
Why do you think he's not?
I don't know. He's a very good communicator. But it's not just him. The entire government doesn't do it. When was the last time you heard? When was the last time you heard? The prime minister, I think, admirably visited Kfar Aza for the first time, or near Oz for the first time, like last week. Why did that take nearly 2 years?
So, as someone who's served in the Knesset and served as in Ron Dermer's position before him.
No one's ever served in Ron Dermer's position. Ron Dermer's position is very unique. It's not as ambassador. Yes,
when he was ambassador, correct. I mean, I'm curious, what would be your best guess about why there isn't that communication?
There are several reasons. One is it's very difficult for the government of Israel to adopt a unified position. So when I'd be in Washington, the foreign minister would come and say, we will never redivide Jerusalem. And then another minister would come and say, oh, we're ready to redivide Jerusalem. And people in Washington say, well, what's your policy? And I'd rather give a lame answer and say, my policy is the position of the government of Israel. The ministers can say all sorts of things. So it's difficult to get a unified position. That's one. Two, there is a tremendous amount of contempt hardwired into Zionist thinking for world opinion. And this goes back to an old Ben Gurionism, that it's not important what the non-Jews think, it's what the Jews do. And you'd be surprised how deep-seated that thinking is here. Finally, there's just despair, especially among young Israelis. No matter what we say, what we do, people are going to hate us anyway. So you have that. So there are many reasons.
As any Israeli will tell you, Israelis love to criticize the state, the policies, and a host of other issues that come their way. So it's a fair game and open question. What do you think is the most legitimate criticism that's leveled against Israel today?